welcome back to Signs of Destiny 2005. We're now at our Saturday evening program, and it's my great pleasure tonight to have a man whom is truly, in all the right senses of the word, a gentleman and a scholar. Sometimes we say that amusedly, but in this case, it is really very, very appropriate. Someone, of course, from England, who educated at Eton, at Cambridge, has written 12 books and a number of essays, and the most recent of which is his Confessions of a Radical Traditionalist. And I think that it says it all about John Michell. He is exactly that, because he works and in the sacred geometry, or the creative geometry area. I was corrected about that. He said that sacred belongs to God. Geometry is creative. And so it is creating, working with number, dimension, understanding how humanity has used the natural process, the divine, and brought them together to create the extraordinary world through number that we have. He's going to talk to us tonight on revelations of crop circles and bringing that ancient wisdom to us in our time, something that we need to remember if we are going to expand and go beyond. Callista and I first met John 10 years ago in England when we were with a tour that was going into crop circles. He was taking people onto the Arthurian sites of England, and since then he has done a lot of very, very fascinating research. The other book that I would strongly recommend to you, if you don't already have it, it is only from England. We don't have it in the States, except we do have copies here, and that is Crooked Soli, which is kind of a strange name, but in fact that is a little hamlet in eastern Wiltshire, and one of the most intriguing of all of the crop circles that have come in the last 30 years occurred there in 2002. And it actually has encoded within it some of the most important numbers that are the basis of really the world that we know and the civilization that we live in. And John Michell, along with mathematician Alan Brown, have decoded Crooked Soli in a way that I think is absolutely masterful. So without further ado, John Michell. The water's yours. Thank you.
Oh, I see. Okay. First, thank you so much, Chet, for that generous introduction, and also to you and Callista for putting on this wonderful, rare event. You know, one of the best things about meetings like this is the people you meet. That is, renewing old friendships and having time to talk to people I wouldn't otherwise have much chance to meet and talk to. You know, talking about the good company we're in, I was made to laugh by, I'm a great follower of Plato, the 5th century BC Greek philosopher, and he said once about the last days, living in the last days. And I suppose we can be said to be living in the last days because things are going faster and faster. There's no way back. We're expanding in a finite world. We can't stay still. We have to go forward, and that way will eventually, of course, lead to some kind of crisis and a collapse or something like that. At least that's how it's what seems inevitable, although of course we never know what the future will hold. But what Plato said about the last days, he said, it's terrible in a way because things are completely chaotic. It's not just in politics and public affairs. But if you look at any aspect of culture, music or painting or art, you see all the signs of dissolution, of confusion, of the collapse of old standards, of things falling apart. And it seems as if we're living in a kind of last days. And Plato said about these last days how terrible they are, but also they're also in a way that the best time that one can live as an individual, because we can more or less say and do as we like. And he said, and also you meet the most remarkable people. And at this meeting I've met remarkable people, and in fact throughout my life the great feature of it is the people I've met. And we heard some wonderful speakers at this weekend, and I've learnt a lot from them, and full of admiration actually for this whole event. Plato also said, which also made me laugh, we're talking about revelation here, because I think, at the beginning again, I think it seems to me, my experience is that we're living in a process of revelation. Truths which 40, 50 years ago no one even knew there was such a thing. Things which are completely unmentioned when I was younger are now commonplace and coming into the open. At the same time, a certain kind of knowledge, long forgotten, so long forgotten that we've even forgotten there is such a thing, is coming to the surface again. And I've experienced these revelations, and I was very encouraged by what Plato said about that. He said the gods choose particularly worthless people to enlighten in order to make it perfectly plain. It's not the professors and the people with qualifications such who are enlightened. If they don't need to be enlightened, they've got it all made already. He said it makes it perfectly plain, the people the gods choose to enlighten, that it can't be them that are making it up, they must be coming through them. So it makes me quite comfortable with revelations to feel that there's no particular credit attached to it. One's a worthless person. That's excellent. One of my first revelations, which took me on this present course, was in the last book in the Bible, in the Christian Bible, the last book in the New Testament, Revelation, written by St. John. And St. John had a vision of, in the very end of the Bible, the last chapter but 1, he has a revelation of the heavenly city. It's that city in which Socrates said, there's a pattern in the heavens, and if you can see it, you can establish it in yourself. And St. John saw this pattern, and he described it as a glowing, glorious city, complete in every aspect, containing every aspect of creation, the whole range of music, of colour, of characters, and he called it the heavenly Jerusalem, because in the Jewish tradition there's a Jerusalem below, which is the mundane city, and there's a Jerusalem above, which is waiting to descend, which is the real Jerusalem, the archetype. And St. John saw this, or had this vision of the holy city. But what he actually happened in Revelation was that something came into his mind. He was certainly a learned man, and he'd studied the apocalyptic tradition. And the apocalyptic tradition is really a tale, as Dickens called a tale of two cities. In his account, there's the tired old city waiting to collapse, which he called Babylon, and that city which is imminent and which begins the whole process, which he called the heavenly Jerusalem. Plato elsewhere in Timaeus and the Critias and the Critias has an account of two cities too. He talks about ancient Athens when it was perfect and innocent and it was divinely founded, and he gives the pattern of that. And then in contrast to that is the mortal city which was wrongly founded and is destined to fall, which he called Atlantis. So these two cities are allegorical cities, and yet in a way they're also the same city, because the whole process begins with revelation, a revelation of the truth, something we can live by, something we can form our institutions by. But of course, as time goes on, we become corrupt. We build prisons, palaces, all the institutions of civilization and greatness and decadence, and that becomes Babylon, the overwrought, overrich city, which for all its finery comes to grief. And of course the merchants are very upset by this, but all the good people are supposed to rejoice in it. And then it follows, in his account, in the apocalyptic tradition, then follows the revelation of that pattern in the heavens, the heavenly Jerusalem, which gives us a new start. And it seems to me that we are living in maybe a little dramatic to say this, but in one way, the last days of Babylon and waiting, and indeed these things are simultaneous. And it's the same city. It's just the tired version of the original city of Revelation. And that is what is being revealed today. Crop circles, like UFOs before them, seem to me to be a part of, or a very important part of, this revelatory process. Do you remember, in 1959, Carl Jung wrote a most perceptive book, very early for a UFO book, 59. It was called, he called it Flying Saucers, Things Seen in the Sky. And he said that there's certain reality to these things. They are seen on radar, and he gave examples of their concrete nature in a way. But he also said, mainly, they are among those signs and wonders which we expect at the end of a certain period and the beginning of another. He said there are agencies and portents of great changes in the way we think. Changes, he said, in the constellations of the gods. And he warned those unprepared for these changes that they would be quite dramatic, and one should prepare for them. That was in 59, when minds were very different to how they are now. And we've seen actually the fulfillment of Jung's prophecy. Things have been largely through, or partly through, the medium of wonders such as the UFO phenomenon, followed by the crop circle phenomenon. Minds have been changed enormously. And I'm very impressed by the crop circle phenomenon, the way in which it's led people on to take an interest in life generally. From crop circles, you go on to geometry, number, music, archaeology at ancient sites, philosophy, and then indeed it's the whole education itself. If you go down to one of those pubs in Wiltshire where the croppies gather, you hear all kinds of talk about the wonders of these times, and people educating each other, opening each other's minds to possibilities, the possibilities there are in this world. There's no need to be bored in this world. I feel so sorry that more children aren't allowed to develop their own enthusiasms, because once you start anywhere, wherever it is, you're bound to be led on to interest in life generally. So this is a wonderful process we're in. And it may seem we're at the very depths of ignorance at this time, but in fact, we're on the cusp, on the verge of, I think, a very big shift. It's happening already, a very big shift in human thinking and consciousness, which will actually create that new heaven and new earth, which St. John saw when he saw his, when he understood his holy city. And that holy city describes, not only, it's a 12-faceted city with 12 gates and 12 gemstones, all of different colors, containing all the holy names. In other words, it's what the Greeks call a pleroma, a fullness, a completeness of things. He described it very beautifully, but he also gave the dimensions of it. And I'm going to be, this revelation I'm talking about, I'll be coming to the content of it at the end. But it's like all cosmologies or scientific views of the world, it's based upon a code of number. Plato spoke about that code of number. He said the Egyptians had it, and they kept it in their temples, and they insisted that everything, all institutions, were done in accordance with this code of number, particularly music, because music is the most influential of arts. And I think he said that the forms of government follow the forms of music. See, in the past, music was strictly controlled. But the legend, or the story of our origins, which all the ancient historians emphasized, Plato particularly, was that at one time the gods came down. He doesn't say who the gods were or what they were like, but all he says of them, they came down and they ruled directly. But they ruled so lightly, we didn't even know we were being ruled. They ruled by music and custom and communicating directly with our most sensitive parts, our souls. And that when eventually in the course of cycle, the gods had to depart, and they instructed certain people in that code by which they ruled, that code of number and proportion and harmony. And as long as we kept it up, it was as if the gods were still ruling. But of course, being humans, we let things slip and let things slide, and we cut corners and we forget to the correct observations, and eventually we go downhill. They may seem uphill into more and more elaborate, unwieldy, and vulnerable societies, and then comes the collapse and the return of a revelation. So it seems to me the revelation is a cyclical thing, and whenever it strikes, whenever it occurs, it creates a renaissance always on the same lines, because the content of this revelation is always the same, because there's only one truth. And I was when this phenomenon began, the crop circle phenomenon, back in the end of the 80s, tail end of the 80s, there was an old man in England, Lord Zuckerman, Sir Solly Zuckerman he had been, and he was the chief government advisor on science. And in his last years, he took an interest in this burgeoning, beginning crop circle phenomenon. And he wrote a long article in it in a respectable magazine, I think it was the Times Literary Supplement, in which he said he was puzzled. He said, well, obviously, these things are intelligence design, and therefore they must be made by the only form of intelligence we know, which is human intelligence. And yet, he said, and yet I'm puzzled by these circumstances. Who could be doing it? And how? And why? And those previous speakers have asked those questions, or reminded us of those questions. And if Zuckerman had lived on to this day, he'd see that nothing's really changed. We still don't know any of the big reasons or any of the big things to know about crop circles. But then, of course, we're in a funny situation in life. We don't really know anything about our circumstances of our existence on Earth. We have many wise men, but wise people among us, learned people, but we've never known the answers to any of the big questions of life. That is, how did the world begin? For any certainty about that, we have myths. The current myth is of a big bang from nothing. And I think Merrily Harper, the cartoonist, the brother of Patrick, the 14 writer, Patrick Harper, did a cartoon once which made me laugh a lot. It was a father reading to his little boy in bed. And he's reading a book called How Did the World Begin? And he says, in the beginning, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, apart from a suspicious-looking package. And that is more or less what they do say, actually. But this is a myth. And to my mind, it's not the myth. It's not a myth we can live by, because scientists and cosmologists today don't realize that cosmology, the way we look at the world, has a tremendous influence on the way we think and the way we live. So they produce these somewhat arbitrary myths, which they don't consider the moral or the social implications of them. And so we live in a world, a rather alienated world of confusion, not really knowing what happened. And of course, not only do we not know how the world began, we don't know how life began. You see, the Darwinians say, oh, life is a product of evolution. And they make evolution actually God, because they say that evolution created mind, and mind created God. So they get everything in a reverse order to the traditional order. And against them are the intelligent design people, who actually have things going their own way, because we know we can see for ourselves the harmony and the organic functioning of the universe, with far more beauty in it than we need to survive. And it looks as if there's a designer or creator behind it. So there's two ways of looking at it. Either you put evolution as a first principle in nature, or you put a mind or a creator as the first principle. And I know which one produces the best, the happiest state of life, and the best way to live and the best way to have a society. And I don't think it's the evolutionary one. Now, I'm told in this country that evolution is rather a tricky topic, because if you say you don't believe in evolution, you're liable to be classed with the people who the East Coast people don't like very much, the dogmatic religious right wing and such. But actually I have quite a lot of sympathy with those people, because they have actually kept up rather more of the traditions than the more febrile people of the East Coast have done. For example, when we had the anti-metric campaign many years ago, we got tremendous support from those people in Texas and those states, and even from an institution called the Cowboy Hall of Fame, who issued a great scroll against the meter. And the objection to the meter is not that it's not a true measure. It doesn't measure anything. It's not based on any standard. They tried to base it upon the dimensions of the Earth, but of course they measured it wrong. And if they kept the foot, as you have here, by this very fine traditionalist strain in this country, it is a true measure. You see, to go into number for a bit, and I'll come on to number again later on, the circumference of the Earth, the meridian, not the equator, is 24883.2 miles. That's as near as we can measure it. And that is 24882 is 12 to the power of 5, or 12 by 12 by 12 by 12 by 12. Traditional cosmology is all framed in 12s, and it combines 7 with it, because 12 is the number of order, and 7 is the number of the soul, or what is eternal. So those two combined represent, as it were, order by reason, and 7 represents the oracle. And in ancient societies, there were 2 institutions. There was the Council of Elders, the 12 elders who made the decisions, and there was the oracle, who had the power of vetoing. And the oracle represented the female principle in society, the intuitive principle. And if the oracle vetoed some proposal to go to war or to pass a certain law, then it wasn't done. So this was a product of that canon of measure and number, which we originally knew and allowed to control our institutions. That was a time associated with when the Holy Grail was on earth. The Grail also means a kind of code of knowledge, of understanding. And when the Grail is on earth, or when the city is revealed, or all these symbols for that perfect order, then we live, of course, in a paradise, an obvious paradise. In other times we live in confusion, though the paradise is still there, and we can each find it for ourselves. Now, what I'm going to do is to show you sort of the process by which the crop circle makers, whoever they are, have revealed their nature. And I've been impressed by the very beginning by the almost angelic nature of this phenomenon. Talking to Linda Howe, who now researches crop circles, made a very acute study of that very nasty phenomenon of animal and cattle mutilation. We agree that the two phenomena are somewhat like each other in that they are both mysterious and done by some unknown agency. But the difference is, of course, that one is demonic or satanic and beastly, and the other one, the crop circle phenomenon, is entirely harmless and beautiful, and can even be called angelic. It comes from a high source. And the more I study this subject, the more I see that whoever's in control of this program, or whatever's in control of this program, it's a very high spiritual source. And it has such beauty that there can be no evil where there's pure beauty. So I think we're so lucky to be living in these times when these wonders are to be seen. And it's congratulations to everyone who's here by seeing what's happening, seeing these wonders, and taking part in celebrating them. I'm going to show a few pictures to trace the development of this phenomenon. I take issue with one or two of the earlier speakers who say that it's not really a new phenomenon, it's been going on all the time. Well, you know, they produce these fairy rings and that sort of thing, but actually when you read this literature, as I've always believed, all you hear about, you don't actually hear about crop circles, you hear about mushroom rings and fairy rings and such. I've talked to Jeff and of course, the Andreas Muller and such, who believe that this is not a new phenomenon, and perhaps they're right, because I've never quite... the moment one begins to think something, the opposite tends to grow in your mind, so you then stop being quite so certain about things. I think this is pretty well a new phenomenon. It's a sign, it's a wonder of its time. I was brought up in the country, we heard nothing about crop circles, there's certainly no tradition of it. But whatever it is, it's it's happening now, and I suppose it'll either come to some climax or it'll dwindle away, and future generations will say, what was that? What were they seeing? What was that? Like we do when people tell us about the fairies and the spirits they used to see, which we don't talk about now. But certainly that reality, the spiritual reality, was very much a very important feature in the past. So much so that throughout the Christian period in Europe, there's been an actual campaign against spirits, demons, fairies, and so on. A poet in the Middle Ages said that young priests were being sent out to pray and do exorcisms, all parts of the country, particularly where there were haunted places and spirits and such, to drive out these spirits. Women, he said, were complaining they couldn't go about their business of being molested by these succubi and demons and such. And the poet then comments rather sarcastically, he said, well, women can now go safely up and down, but the trouble is these young priests and pardours who are praying everywhere, they're the danger nowadays. But of course you can't banish spirits of a rational universe entirely, because the world is not like that. And this phenomenon, we're seeing the return of something we can't understand and something in a very beautiful form. Look, this picture here is of an early formation. We've heard about it by other speakers earlier, the Barbary Castle phenomenon, formation. Top right, you see those three yellow circles, which were basically what it was, and the geometry behind them. And John Langlish, who surveyed it, gave us the dimensions. The radius of the inner circle is 71 feet, and the outer circles each 41 feet. That means that 71 to 41 is a very close approximation, in fact the best you can get, like we use 22/7 for pi. So 71/41 is a very close approximation to the square root of 3. And that means that the combined areas of those three outer circles equal the inner circle. So from the beginning we were being drawn towards geometry, and a lot of people there's been a tremendous revival of interest in symbolic geometry. Some people call it sacred geometry. I don't use that term because it sounds a bit too pious and exclusive, because all geometry is sacred, meaning it's eternal. It's the same for everyone, of all times and all places. The square or the circle don't belong to any particular people or any particular time. They're there for everyone all the time. They're always the same. The hexagon is not just the Star of David, it's a hexagon. It's the same. It means the crystalline. It means a material side of nature. Everything, water and ice and such, crystallize as hexagons. All crystals are hexagonal. The opposite of or the complementary to the 6 is the number 5, which is the number of growth and form. It's the basis of the golden section by which plant growth proceeds, and which indeed all organic growth proceeds. You see, in the next, another early one was this Mandelbrot set, which was explained to us earlier on. I can't remember who it was now. It was, anyway, doesn't matter. That's a very nice picture of it. That appeared in, do you remember what, was it 91 or something like that, near Cambridge. And I was very struck by, you remember Professor Hawking, the one who has these cosmological theories involving black holes and so on? He said, oh, of course, this is done by young people from Cambridge as a joke or a hoax or something like that. I thought to myself, if he can be so bloody dogmatic and say something which he knows nothing about, how do we know his black holes are so absolutely true too? You see, I was talking about fairies earlier on and angels. I'd rather believe, or rather accept, angels and fairies, because at least people have seen angels. Whereas black holes are, just creatures of mathematics. They've got no actual physical existence. They're just theoretical mathematical constructs. So what we're seeing at this time is a return to traditional cosmology, in which everything has its place, in which when all the elements are in their right place, There's no evil because everything has its place. We're not fighting against anything. We're incorporating everything that exists, accepting everything that exists and finding its place. There's a big difference between that and between the moralistic idea that we must fight against evil and exalt good, because that way we get into a terrible muddle and we end up in a civil war against ourselves because we're fighting ourselves all the time. So I prefer the inclusive cosmology in which everything could happen, everything that is, it has its place. And that, of course, includes the signs and wonders and all the mysterious things that always happen in this world. The ancient people, of course, before modern times, we lived in a world of spirits, in which people were very careful about their relationship to the spiritual world and to nature. Whilst we did away with that, we're left without any deep insight into nature. When strange things happen, we're confused and worried and think this is wonderful or terrible. But we must realize in this world you just have to accept the date of the phenomena that there is. And this matter of whether you believe it or not is really quite irrelevant, because spirit will always be there with us. Then again, I'm going to point out, it's been pointed out before, indeed, but one of the things that crop circles are obviously pointing out is towards ancient sacred places. I think it was Jeff earlier who said that about 65% of crop circles or crop formations in this country have been adjacent to ancient sacred sites, Indian sites and so on. And that's been a very emphasized pattern in England, in fact in Britain, that so many of them are pointing out, actually indicating sacred sites. Some of them, as Jeff said earlier about the American examples, sites which have disappeared. But the two which have been most especially emphasized are Stonehenge and that even earlier temple, Avebury, the central temple of prehistoric southern England, and also placed at a very strange, very impressive geographical position, just where the 7th division of the world takes place. That means that if you were to draw the circumference of the Earth through the poles, the meridian, if you went from the equator to the latitude of Avebury, you'd have gone 1/7 of the distance around the world, or is it 4/7 of the distance between the equator and the North Pole. It's a latitude 360 over 7 degrees, 51.42857, and Stonehenge is exactly a quarter of a degree, 17.28 miles south of that. I did a book with Robin Heath called The Measure of Albion, I think it may be here, and pointing out some of the ancient pattern over the whole British Isles and further. I did a book also called 12 Tribe Nations with Christine Roan, which is about this habit of cosmological societies based upon the cosmological view of the universe, with its 12 facets, its 12 gods, its 12 signs of the zodiac and so on, perfectly ordered by the number 12. And in these societies, their ritual centre was always on the longest axis through the country. You can see it most clearly in islands which have natural boundaries. And wherever I looked at this book, The Centre of the World, I was able to identify not only the known sacred national ritual centres, but ones which hadn't been really identified before then, which were absolutely halfway along the main axis of the country. Now, through Avebury runs, and this, by the way, is the ring of the central temple of Avebury's huge earthwork, which contains a great stone circle, which itself contains other stone circles and other features. And this was certainly the great ritual centre of southern England, to which the tribes of the whole country would come at certain times of the year for trading, games, competitions, judgments, trials, law courts, and of course holding festival and bartering and exchanging goods. It was the biggest cattle fair in southern England. Tribes came from all over that country at certain times to exchange, to conduct ordinary human business. And the country round there was rather like the country round Delphi, which had the same function in ancient Greece. It was the ritual centre and the divine and sacred centre of ancient Greece and the Greek world. And actually that's placed very near to the the 3/7 part of the distance between the equator and the North Pole, whereas Avery is 4 divisions. It's a 4th part of the 7 divisions. Delphi is the 3rd part. And the 2/7 part is actually Memphis, Thebes, in Egypt, which was the great ritual center of southern Egypt, until Akhenaten changed it and put it on the pole of Egypt, because that axis through the country represents the pole of the universe, which itself represents an eternal and unchanging law, because the axis doesn't move, whereas the whole world of phenomena goes round the axis of the universe. The pole itself, the axis itself, remains unmoved. So it's a symbol of divine law. And that's why the ancients would locate their centers like Avery upon the longest axis through that country, which represented symbolically the pole, and gave authority to the ruler who was installed there. And the ruler, the feature of his installation was always he was married ritually to the goddess of the country, who is eternal, and she sanctions the marriage. And she'll take the finest youth of the country as our mate. And they weren't sentimental about royalty. If he didn't succeed, if he lost his battles and he didn't make it rain, he was out of favor with the goddess. He was deposed and someone more congenial was chosen in his place. It was a very hierarchical society, all these cosmological societies, all based upon this same model, the model of the universe, numerically and geometrically expressed. This is something which I've spent many years investigating and elucidating, and I'm so thrilled to see it unmistakably represented and brought to light in the crop circle, which I'll come on to later, the one I've written the book about with Alan Brown, Crooked Soli. And this one you see outside Avebury. Here is this formation of some years back, which is just by that dolmen, that stone. It's a ruined stone a monument with a big capstone supported by upright stones. You see them all over the place. No one quite knows what they were for, but they were certainly to do with initiation and ritual and manipulation of the light from the heavenly bodies, and probably and more certainly to do with the cycle of death and rebirth. Because when you go into ancient monuments and their locations and their placings and such, and the huge effort they made towards constructing them and planning them, it's something very, very important in their lives, and they knew something about the progress of the soul, as indeed they do in traditional societies in India, Tibet and so on. And this was a whole science devoted towards the progress of the soul and keeping wisdom in their, as rulers within the country. There's one in very early years, in the 80s I think, in Scotland, rather rare one. John Haddington took this picture, and you see the beautifully swirled circle in the foreground with an avenue going up to that feature at the back, and that is, with the trees and the mound, that's what they call a law place, where they had local law courts and probably festival gatherings and so on. It's called something, I can't remember the name, it's something's law, but that's pointed out very clearly by that circle. And then of course we come to Stonehenge, that remarkable temple founded several thousand years before it was actually, before the actual stones which we see now were placed there. They were placed there around about in the beginning of the Bronze Age, about 2000 BC, but the site was already known. As I say, it relates to Avebury as being 1/4 of a degree to the south of that significant line of latitude which runs through Avebury. And there's Stonehenge seen from the outside, looking along the avenue, which you can actually hardly see except from the air. And that avenue points to the sunrise on the longest day. That is when, at full midsummer, when the light prevails over the darkness. And that was one of the great festival days. That was one of the days when after the cycle of law courts throughout the country, everyone came together at the centre and celebrated and had their festivals and such and their dealings there at this annual, what the Scandinavians call the Allthing, because the thing was the law court and the Allthing was the central law court. And you see, the country was then divided into 12 sections. You see it now in Ireland with the 4 quarters of Ireland, the 4 provinces, which were each divided into 3. And originally, the High King was at the centre, where the 4 provinces meet. It's a place in Westmeath. And that was where the High King would sit on the festival day with the 4 provincial kings around him, each king or each chief with 2 retainers of the 2 other divisions of his province, 3 in each province, making 12 in all. And then the law court, the laws and the festival cycle would go around the country with 1 month in each quarter. You see the same thing with King Solomon. He was said to be, he was fed by each of the 12 tribes in turn. That meant he progressed round the country, holding court in the 12 sections, in each of the 12 tribes. And of course, many other countries had 12 tribes too. The Greeks had their 12 tribes, and they each inhabited a 12th section of the country. And the law, not only did the law courts go round, but the cycle of music went round. There was a state chant, which was kept as a perpetual chant at the centre. There was monks, even into early Christian times, and it's still upheld to this day in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, where the Ethiopians keep it up. That is a perpetual chant going on day and night, varying with the seasons and the cycles, and it's reflected in the music that went round the country and was heard at the local festivals, not in chant form, but in the form of popular music, which could be danced to and sung to and such. So the cycle of music went round the country, and so did the cycle of myth. So in Celtic countries, there was the King Arthur cycle. In Babylon, it was Gilgamesh. And all these heroic cycles are divided into 12 parts, 12 episodes. And these episodes were located at spots around the country. And that's why you get, all over Northern Europe, wherever the Celtic culture prevailed, you get whole landscapes in which certain places are said to be the scenes of certain episodes in the Arthurian cycle. There's not one historical king. It was, every landscape was ritualized to form a round table in which the music and the ritual went round in a cycle and held people in tune with the seasons. That was the old system of rule, and it was inherited from, well, by the tradition, inherited from the gods, who laid down this a cosmological pattern with 12 parts and combined with the 7. And even in astrology today, we have the 12 signs and the 7 planets. There's many examples of the 12 and the 7 combining, and in geometry. And I practice this creative geometry or symbolic geometry, you find that when you combine the 12 and the 7, you find it's natural, they want to be combined. And the lovely thing about this practice of geometry is you're not inventing anything, you're discovering what's there already, what's been known in ancient times. So it's one you get closer to a very high mind indeed. And I'm very, very impressed, but in this crop circle phenomenon, by the evidence in it of a cultured mind of a higher quality than we find among ourselves. It's the same as a human mind, but more witty, more elusive, more cultured, more beautiful than anything we know. I'll give some examples of that as we go through. Anyway, there's Stonehenge looking along the avenue where the sun comes into the temple on the longest day of the year. There's another view of it by Haddington. What's happened to it? It's gone. I think I don't quite recognise it. Is it back to front? I think it is, isn't it? Maybe you can see the avenue coming along towards Stonehenge in the snow. And there's all painters who've done Stonehenge. They always painted with mystical atmospheric effects. There's Turner, Stonehenge during a terrible thunderstorm which seemed to have knocked over a lot of the sheep in the foreground. every painter does it with strange lights, consolidated with rainbows. It's always done in this romantic way as a place of magic. And painters see more than most of us. And that, when the crop circle thing began, it very soon began to concentrate on Stonehenge. In the early years, we had these strange things we called insectograms after pictograms, and there's two formations with Stonehenge in the background. There's one we saw earlier, but a lot of these pictures you've seen before, but they're so good, these crop circles, and they're meant to be seen, they're meant to get into our minds, I think. So I don't apologise by showing them ones you're already familiar with, but there again is Stonehenge in the background, and that road, the A-something, the main road to Cornwall, going in between the two. And there's that, one of the most finest, most remarkable formations we've ever had in, was it 91? I mean 2001, I think it was. The Ribbons it was called. And you see these Bronze Age barrows. You see how each of those 6 arms, or 3 of those 6 arms, just graze the barrows they're adjacent to, and one just touches the road going up to that ancient road which goes up there to Stonehenge, which you can hardly see, but is there, that circle at the end of the road in the background. And you see, there's another example of wit, I'd say. If just that little bit of ground, they've just put in this remarkable, elaborate formation, which is very difficult to draw on paper. Michael Glickman's done it, and I've tried to. Now, I never tried to do that one. I couldn't do it, but Michael did. I think Alan Brown did. But to draw a thing like that in the 4 or 5 hours of summer night darkness, illegally, in a place where there's always plenty of people looking at barrows and that sort of thing, it's barely believable. If it wasn't there as a witness, I'd hardly believe it. And so we're sort of baffled by this. It's just too wonderful to be true, and yet there it is. Then again, we get to the wit and beauty, which it strikes me very, very much. We've seen this before. I think who was it who? Jeff, it was who spoke about this as being like a paper folding thing, which of course it is. It's like two pieces of paper folded together. That's right. Yes. Three bananas, whatever they are. Beautiful thing. A hexagonal, rather beautiful hexagonal design, so economical, so beautiful, and so adapted to this wonderful medium of the wheat fields. Another one extremely difficult to draw, that elaborate and very beautiful spiral. They're not just, you can't just draw these things by hand. You need to find centers for all these arcs if you're going to draw it by any method, whether by a pencil and compass or by a rope. You've got to find centers, and because so often the hypothetical centers for these things are actually, no one's been there, because if you walk through any of this wheat, you're bound to make a mark, and there's no marks where the hypothetical centers are. You see how beautifully each point trails off into a very, very sharp point, which is just smaller than a human foot, which then joins the next spiral. And then, as for beauty, this was called the angel by some people, quite rightly, I think, because we don't know what angels look like, but they could well look like that as you see them. That's such a satisfactory and beautiful thing, with such tiny thin lines all coming to a point at the bottom of just at the bottom of that circle of standing corn. But the second circle, they haven't intruded upon it. So it's difficult to know how it could be done, and it's difficult to and it's certainly a most lovely thing, particularly in this medium. There's again a flower with one of the petals turned up. That's just the biggest. I think it's 409 circles. It's not actually a complicated pattern, because the center of each of those arcs is in the arc to the left of it. But we could do these 400 and something circles, each graded in a few hours of night, it's impossible. It takes much longer than that to draw it with all the aids of compass, rulers, whatever you like, a light and such. I've tried to draw them. It always takes longer than there was available to do it in the field. And of course, incomparably easier to do it at one's desk on a small scale. To do this thing, it must be about 800 feet across. It filled a whole field. This is one of the most remarkable ones, I think. Again, it was about 4 years ago. And if you look at it, it looks very simple, like printer's M's or like pixels, something like that. But actually, you look at it, it's 20 a side, so there's 400 of these little divisions. But each group of 10 by 10 is different, and indeed, each group of 5 by 5 is different. And when you look at it carefully, there's no line, there's no single line that goes through where you can walk through, because every line is blocked by one of the smaller little formations. The only clear line is that diagonal down to the bottom left diagonal, bottom left corner. I've seen something like this, strange enough, among the huge landscape designs, which, to his credit, von Däniken first published, covering whole areas of the mountains of Peru. This is not just like the Nazca lines. This is something where a pattern like this has been drawn and embedded in the landscape over many, many square miles, over huge mountainous landscapes. Almost impossible to survey, and incredible to find these patterns. Yet there they are. It's one of von Däniken's books about 5 years ago, where he showed these extraordinary patterns, which I say you wouldn't be seen except for high up in the air. Yet there they are. When you go to the ground, you can't see very much. So I'd love to go actually and take some measurements of them. Then we had these lovely things, aren't they? They were seen as planetary orbits of some cosmological or astronomical device, but I don't think anyone quite identified what they might be. But they're beautifully executed. There's that one which is like a magnetic field. You see, and in fact, it's quite easy to draw once you see how. What you do is you divide the outer circle into 60 divisions, and you cut out the main diameter going east to west. So you have 58 divisions, and you draw a line from each point. You draw 2 lines from each point, one to each of the 2 foci there. And of course those lines look white, so that they're the trample corn, and the dark area is a standing corn. Actually, that's a drawing I did when I found out how to draw this thing, and there at the bottom is how it's done. Each of those foci receive a line from each of those points. So there's 100, if there's 60, there'd be 120 lines drawn, and that automatically creates, as you see on that, the bottom right, that creates those divisions, and then, or rather, then you lay down some of them to create the thing on the left, to create that thing there. It's not an original thing. I've seen it. I've seen it in a book of geometry. So I don't know the status of it. I don't really care actually, because these things, wherever they come from, are part of the overall effect. There are some circles which are pretty dumb, pretty bad, and they're copies. But hoaxes never originate; they only copy. And the original designs we've seen are things which haven't been seen before. Whereas I know the Hopi and other people say, oh, we know these signs, but they don't really. They know pentagons, they know hexagons, they know squares, and we all do. But these things are unique. They've never been seen before. There's no book of symbols which has, I don't mean this one, but has some of the others we've seen. They're original. And they come from, I repeat myself, a very high source of intellect and culture. A sort of optical illusion, isn't it, of a cushion or something like that. And that wonderful spiral we saw before. There again, how are you going to lay out a spiral like that when you've got no centres to construct these curves from? And the famous basket. I'd always thought that what's his name, Koch got up early in the morning, and flew over it and saw it, and then it was destroyed. But Andreas Müller said he and his friend were the only people who actually went into it very early in the morning. The farmer was furious by it and destroyed it before 10 in the morning, so no one actually had got a chance to see it. Matthew Williams, the hoaxer, said to me, "Oh, I did that." I said, "How do you do it?" He said, "Oh, we just divide into 6 divisions." I said, "But there's 7 divisions." He said, "Oh, 7 divisions." So what? You see, these phenomena, you shouldn't be worried about this, because all outbreaks of esoteric or occult phenomena or spiritual phenomena always attract the tricksters, the hoaxers, the funny men of all kinds to confuse the issue. In an early issue of the Seriologist, which I edited and founded, Jocelyn Godwin wrote a piece pointing this out, that all outbreaks of psychic phenomena are always attended, and the waters are always muddied by the people who come with their own agenda to spin off it or to discredit or do something, or they're frightened of it or they're attracted to it in some way. So I don't worry about the funny people who are attracted to the subject. In fact, they make the whole subject a bit more merrier, perhaps. But isn't that beautiful with that basket work? And it could easily, if it hadn't been for those good visitors, Germany and Switzerland, lazy English who don't get up till they've slept off the booze of the night before, wouldn't have seen that. It had been lost forever. That's what I drew, just because I was struck by it. It's a faithful copy of what was in the cornfield. And the point of it, that triangle, you see a triangle within a circle. Actually, the point of it, as far as I can see, is that you've got equal areas, precisely equal matching areas of dark and light, of virgin cornfield and the trodden down wheat. Oh, sorry, we say corn. There's a terminological confusion which goes on, because in England we say cornfields mean corn, which mean oats, wheat and barley and such. We call what you call corn maize, but here corn is confined to maize, and so we speak of, this is actually wheat, and so we now call them crop fields to avoid confusion. But that's a beautiful geometrical theme, because it's, as I say, it's a division of an area into equal areas of dark and light. Now this one was one really aroused my interest, and first persuaded me that this is done, this certainly was done from a distance. And the reason I concluded this was because there's an inner pattern to it, and you might be able to see, if you look, this is Steve Alexander's photograph, you see curves inside it which are sort of following the outline and then coming to a sort of spiral in the middle. I'll show you the picture as I drew it out. It's called a fractal hexagon, because there's a hexagon, and then you draw the triangle on that, so you get another hexagon, and so on, and you go on ad infinitum, smaller and smaller. It's a fractal pattern. Now that's what the inside looks like, and you see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexagonal curved formations, one inside the other, culminating in a spiral. What it looks like, it looks as if something hit the center, did a spiral, and then came out in bands, getting more and more rectilinear as they get to the outside, and then eventually culminating in this very clear-cut straight line, straight-edged hexagon. That's something you wouldn't have seen, if I wouldn't have seen it, if it hadn't been for the clarity of the photographs of Lucy Pringle and Steve Alexander, where this pattern was evident. And of course it doesn't help in any artificial construction process. It's action at a distance. And it's I don't know, as I say, I know nothing at all about what's behind it. But evidently, it's as if someone designed that on a computer and then pressed a button and it printed out on a field. Could somebody be able to control a sort of vortex, a magic whirlwind or something, which can be directed somewhere and then collapse to spill its guts on a field and put out the pattern programmed into it? My technological friends say that's quite impossible. Well, I'm sure it is, but it's as if that was done. In other words, it's done at a distance. And then just after that was this beautiful witty comment on it, where the whole thing's turned inside out, and the outside is repeated on the inside. Isn't that a most wonderful, wonderful thing? And of course, when you've got standing wheat or crop in the centre, you can't have access to that. I know a tramline passes near the centre, but you've got no access to that to swing a rope or to lay out this 6-part division. To do a 6-part division, you really need to draw a circle, and then you keep the compass at the same opening, and you cut out 6 arcs. It's the first thing a child does with a compass. I believe John Michell Melchizedek, who does these hexagons and calls them the tree of life and has some fancy philosophy or stuff around them. I'm sorry to be a bit bitchy, but I get a bit galled by... I won't go into any further into this, actually. And that's when it came this year, and I drew it, measured it, actually. This beautiful octagon. And no one's ever done a thing like this. Do you see how you've got the central square, and then the 4 major squares around it, and then the 8, and then you've got 12 divisions. It's beautifully numerical and beautifully contrived. It's a wonderful thing. It was in East Field at Alton Barnes. And it came early in the season, so a lot of people saw it. Actually, it's come up sideways. I wanted the moon to be on top, so it was shining down on that, but you see it's gone a bit sideways. And now we come to the face and the message, as I call it, that thing which happened in 2001 at the Chilbolton Observatory in Hampshire. And the Chilbolton Observatory was used many years before that by SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and run largely by Carl Sagan and Francis Drake. And they, as you remember, sent this famous message into space by the huge Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico, the radio telescope, which gave physical data about our world and our Earth and our solar system and ourselves, our population and various other things to do with our chemical components and so on. And that was sent off in a rocket into space. No, sorry, it wasn't at all sent off in a rocket. I think it was beamed out into space by radio pulses, using a binary pulse, which everything was either black or white. And it was done so that it could be put together in only one way as a rectangle, because the number was a prime number, and it was not a prime number, it was a number that had just 2 divisors. So it was, I can't remember the exact number, but it had to be something else by something else, the only number which made up this number itself. Anyway, the result was, when you set it out, was a panel which could be then decoded to give this data about ourselves and the world. And then that year, beside this telescope, this radio telescope at Chilbolton, a small place now used for sort of weather reporting, but it was used in connection with this program to help, I think, beam out the messages into space, or it played some part in it anyway. And I don't think it really expected an answer. It was largely a thing for getting grants and for attracting attention to space and so on. It was slightly political on the part of SETI. But it did attract attention. It also attracted an answer many years later. And that little panel there is the answer. You see it's pointing directly at that telescope in a rather pointed manner to indicate that telescope. And with it came another panel, that one you see at the bottom left, sorry, at the bottom centre, which is a face. And it's an optical illusion, because it looks like as if the dark areas are the drawing, are the holes, and the white areas are drawing. In fact, it's the other way around. The dark areas are the standing wheat, clumps of wheat, and the light areas are where it's been laid down. And it's done on a grid. You see a diagonal grid of squares. I forget how many there were, but it's about 400 or something like that. And there are either big or small clumps of wheat left, and that makes the image. I mean, when you look at it, it looks like a sort of loosely knit dishcloth or something like that, or a bit of knitting with widely separated stitches. And the actual pattern is made up by the effect of the sun, the sunlight, shining, casting shadows from the clumps of wheat. And as the sun moves round, that face would have changed. Now, there weren't many photographs taken of it, but I could do there could be a computer simulation whereby you could trace the course of that face as the sun goes round. It would inevitably change. So we only see that image, that aspect of it. It's the most beautiful thing, and no one's ever thought of this kind of art. Indeed, the whole phenomenon is so ahead of any of those land artists, Hamish Fulton and Richard Long and these people, who are stumbling compared to the beauty and mystery of this greatest art event of our time, the whole crop circle phenomenon. Now, what is this face? Some people see a pretty girl in it. Somebody see that anywhere, perhaps. Some people see a gangster with dark glasses. Some people see Elvis Presley, of course. And well, everyone could have a go. And perhaps it's a composite photograph of ourselves or something like that. But it was very enigmatic and a most remarkable and beautiful thing. And this is actually slightly in the wrong order. I'll go on a bit. And that was the paddle which was pointing at the telescope. Now, it has a meaning. I'll show you now the one that we sent into space, the one that Carl Sagan and Frank Drake and SETI sent into space. And it's that thing on the left. This is the explanation on the right. And what it is, the top row represents in binary the numbers 1 to 10, the basis of our counting. And then the next row is the atomic numbers for the chemical elements of which we're composed, mainly carbon, of course. And then comes that upright thing, which is to do with nucleotides in a human makeup, and DNA. Those strands on either side of it. Immediately below the upright feature is an image of a stylized image of a human figure. To the left of that, again in binary, is the population of our Earth. And I can't remember what's on the right of it. And then below the figure are those symbols. The one on the right represents the sun, and the others are the planets in the right order from the sun. And our Earth is raised up to show it's inhabited. So you've got the planetary system. That's the second one from the bottom, just below the human figure. And then below the human figure is a mysterious symbol, which actually represents the Arecibo telescope. And on the right is its diameter, 1,000 feet. And that's the lens from which the message emanated. And to go back, that was the thing was beamed into space. And to go back, that is the corresponding message which came back. And it's different in several ways, but it's the same in many ways. The top row is the same. The numbers 1 to 10 are the same as they would be anywhere in the universe, because there's only one number system. Below it are, again, the elements of which the people who call whoever sent this answer or created this answer claim to be comprised of. And instead of carbon, it's silicon. The atomic number for silicon, I think, is 14, which is largely what computerware is made of, isn't it? Which seems to be very significant. And then below that again, the one representing the nucleotides and the DNA is much the same but slightly different. And then below the upright feature, you see a sort of humanoid creature with a big head, small body and a little stalk for a neck and such. That corresponds to the picture we sent of the human figure. On the left of it is again in binary, is the population. I think it's 4-point-something billion, because it's several times larger than ours. And there's other data, I can't remember. And then just below the figure, again, is the the composition of their solar system, with the sun on the right, and then three planetary symbols are raised up. One which looks like it has four satellites or 4 moons round it. So it means that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 planets, as well as the sun, of which 3 are inhabited, and their population is much larger than us. And then at the bottom is a very strange symbol. It took some people to get some time to realize what that was. It's in the place of where, from Arecibo, was sent the image of the Arecibo telescope and its measurements. In other words, that was the place where it came from. So this would be, excuse me, this would be the place from which this message came from. That puzzled people for a while, but then it was realized that the year before, on exactly the same site as this, there was a strange crop circle formation. Sorry, I've gone the wrong. Yes, there it is. So there's the telescope, and there, in exactly the same spot, is that strange sort of, perhaps the fractal pattern, of arcs and circles and such. It was called the brooch because it looks like a bit of some brooch or a bit of jewellery. And that image was made square and stylized and was reproduced at the bottom there. So what it means is this message came from the very place where it was sent. It comes to the very place where it appears. So it was sent from, they're saying it was sent from here, because that's where that position is where that crop circle, whose stylized form is below, was the year before. So the implication is that this message wasn't sent from anywhere else, it came from here, that we're among you now. And we're largely made of silicon. What does that mean, I wonder? It's very suggestive, isn't it? And you see, this isn't tomfoolery, this isn't some prankster or joker, it's a very serious, earnest message, answering absolutely term for term the rather dim, I thought, rather literalistic message we sent out, but faithfully copying it term for term. And what a feat to be able to rule this area. It looks a bit foreshortened because actually the photographer took it from that side round. I had to turn the slide upside down to get it in the right order, so it was actually perfectly rectangular. And as you see, of extraordinary construction, all done in lines, and with all this binary notation worked out and represented in the field without a mistake. This is all done in one piece. It's not a laboured thing. It came overnight, I think. They say the face came earlier. I heard from Linda Howe, who investigated. She's a wonderful investigator, researcher. She goes into things very carefully, and she interviewed the director of this telescope, the radio telescope. He said they'd noticed something in the far end of the field about 7 days, about a week before, but no one looked at it. They're meant to be looking at the sky, not looking at crop circles, you see. They're scientists, not cranks. See? So they quite rightly paid no attention to it. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. Well, perhaps I'm not. What a phenomenon. And then that takes some pondering, this face in the message. I thought it's so important, I did a report on it as far as I could. I made a few mistakes, I think, in some of the details. I've been corrected since. But certainly I've got all these pictures, the message we sent, what it means, the details of the message which was received in turn. You'd think that when the message came back, the SETI would be delighted, got a response, but not at all. They were angry. This is a jokers trying to hinder our serious research. And Linda Howe was telling me today how she went and bearded the astronomer, the head of the School of Astronomy at Cornell University, a great dignitary. And she tactfully showed him this picture to return, and he got into a complete fury and walked off and just wanted to dismiss her within a minute. It's not our business to look at crop circles and that sort of thing. God, these people are pompous. You think they'd be delighted, but they're so self-important. Oh no, if they get anything to say, they'd have come directly to us. Yeah. They didn't. But see, in this thing, again, I see a lightness of touch, a wittiness, a high culture, which indicates we're dealing with a very beautiful, a very delightful form of intelligence. It could be from elsewhere, or it could be from among us. Because until modern times, we always realized that we're not alone on this earth, that this earth is full of all kinds of spiritual beings, from what we call angels and benevolent powers and gods indeed, right through mischievous spirits, local spirits, spirits of the dead, many of whom are pretty poor quality and nasty creatures, right down to the demons of hell, who cause madness and such. And when people are paranoid schizophrenics, I've seen them possessed of some very nasty demon. I've actually heard on one occasion the demon's voice speaking out of somebody I knew when he was having a fit and a seizure. And this voice was speaking to me. And he was saying, "I will kill you." And the man who had this demon in him tried to control himself and said to me, "You better get out." And I walked out of the house and left him to it and came back later. And he'd written like do you remember the Sharon Tate murder with Charlie Manson? They wrote Helter Skelter and such in paint all over the room. It was very much like that. He'd written mad things on the room. That was a demon, and I've seen it in action. And though, I mean, a lot of these illnesses could be chemical imbalance, but I find it much more comprehensible and nearer the facts of the matter to see it as cases of possession, to go back to our previous habit of seeing the world as being inhabited by all kinds of other dimensional or spiritual creatures. We feel, if we, having got rid of demons for very good reasons, and angels and fairies and spirits and such, to make the world a cleaner, safer place, now of course we miss them. Rather like, I think there's been so many genocides throughout the world, where we got to a new country, throughout the Pacific and such, all people, they usually eventually get tired of the native tribes and they kill them off, and then having killed them off, rather miss them. Yeah. So, but something is being brought into us by all this activity, some indication that we are. See, when I was I wrote for a newspaper, the Daily Mirror, and the editor said, ask people about their UFO experiences. And after writing about it myself, I asked them. I got a wonderful flood of letters, and I was absolutely amazed by the striking similarities between many of the cases, all coming from ordinary people who just never written to anyone before about it, and were just saying what's happened to them. And the typical one was, say, a couple are driving home in the evening, and they see a strange light or strange object in the sky, and they stop to have a closer look, and sometimes it has coloured lights. It's a bit hypnotic, and it pulses, and it radiates, and the lights change. It's a rather wonderful show, and then it either vanishes or disappears. And that's the end of it. They go back. And they all write and say, after that, we feel different. We don't think the same way. And they all said, then we realized we're not alone. That was the most common phrase. They all said, or nearly all, or so many of them said, we then realized we are not alone. As if this world is being re-spiritualized. And the corresponding knowledge, which is divine knowledge, which goes with that, is also being returned to us by the same agency. Look, when this came, that was the following year after the face and the message. This ET face, as we call it, with this disc also in binary. A lot of people were dismayed. I mean, John Haddington said this is satanic. Some people said it reminds them of something nasty. But actually, all it is a face that we projected on ETs ourselves. You know, that is the face of the Greys, which Whitney Strieber and others generally emerged as our cartoon or consensus view of what these little creatures looked like. But we paint them as demons, but it doesn't mean to say, I mean, if that's what they look like, that's what they look like. And I think it'd be rather impertinent to say to criticize their appearance. And then with it, but it was a strange thing, and with it was this disk. Now, when it was interpreted from the binary by some of our brilliant experts, the message in it was rather banal, ending up with a bell rings or something. I can't remember what it said about how it didn't like hoaxes and such, but I think that behind that overt message there was a code. I've never gone into it myself, so I'm not an expert in binary or any other thing or anything like that. But I think it wasn't quite what meets the eye. Anyway, this thing was on a huge scale. It's a very big formation. And you notice how it's done in these lines, rather like on a television, old-fashioned television screen, the lines, and they're slightly different grades and sizes. And a lot of people didn't like it, as I said. A lot of people said, oh, it's a hoax and such. But when it came for some of the hoaxing teams, like Lundberg and Dickerson, they were commissioned by Orange Telephones to do a face like that, or to do an image like that. And they eventually copied this and came up with other figures. I haven't got a slide of it, unfortunately. But it was so much, they worked by day, legally, over several days. And they came up with a tiny, much tinier image than this, which was mechanical, all done with a roller, so all the lines through were of equal width. There was no subtlety in it, and the image wasn't very good. And that's what the best crop circle makers, that's all they could do in unlimited time or generous amount of time, working under ideal conditions. There was nothing like the scale and the subtlety of this thing. And of course, they never attempted anything like that disk, which, even whatever it says, is a pretty marvelous feat of construction and able to be interpreted. There's another view of it. And you see those three little UFOs seem to be at the bottom, or halfway down near the bottom left, one above the other. But I don't know what you make of that image. It's perhaps they're playing back to ourselves what we projected upon them. But I think it's a wonderful formation. You don't often see it referred to for these reasons. And then comes the one which gave me such great delight. We called it Crooked Soley after the little town hamlet just above Hungerford in Wiltshire, actually on the Wiltshire-Berkshire border, where it appeared. It appeared very late in the season, just after that E.T. face, and it attracted little attention because most people, the people from overseas who came over, had mostly gone home, and all the crop circle conferences are done and such. It attracted very little attention, and I never saw it until Alan Brown wrote to me about a year afterwards. He'd noticed it straight away. He'd also noticed something extraordinary about it, that it's a numerical thing. You see how this formation, first of all, was a circle of untrodden wheat, 150 feet in diameter. Now, first of all, I don't know how you actually draw a perfect circle without gaining access to the center to swing a rope or a compass or something like that, particularly on that scale. Anyway, that's a mystery. And then, in this field around it, it's divided into sections, 1,296 sections, which is 36 by 36 into the square of 36, 1296. And it's made by 72 arcs of a circle, drawn as if you were drawing it, and I did draw it. You put your compass just on the border of the inner circle, and you swing arcs in each 72 in each direction, making a whole field which is divided into little squares, of which some are left standing and some are laid down, all individually laid down. And the number standing is 504, and the number laid down is 792. They add up to 1,296, and they are in relationship as 7 to 11, because 7 times 72 is 504, the number of standing clumps, and 11 times 72 is 792, which is the number of squares which have been where the wheat has been laid down. And it only lasted again a few hours. Not the farmer was angry about it, but because it was time for the harvest. It's the very end of the season, and there you see him with his tractor getting up steam to come in and reap this wheat field for his valuable wheat, which will of course involve the destruction of this thing. And no one actually, as far as I know, actually went into it. It was so quickly reaped, rather like the basket reaped within hours of being seen, that only one, I think only Steve Alexander got a photograph of it. In rather strange, mysterious circumstances, actually. He said he was called up early in the morning by a pilot who was flying over and seen it, and called up Steve, and he got busy and got into his aeroplane and took the photographs. But he's never told us who the photographer was, who the pilot was who alerted him to it. And when Alan Brown showed me this and showed me the numbers in it, and he knew the significance of them, because I'd written most widely on those two numbers. The two numbers, 10 times the numbers here indicated, that is 5,040 and 7,920. Now those two numbers are the key numbers in that canon of number which is being revealed, which I got onto about 35 years ago and been working on ever since. And I've been trying to draw attention to this canon of number and the whole science and the philosophy that goes with it, but without much success. So it was a godsend to me to have this thing where you can demonstrate these numbers visually and see how they appeared spontaneously and awake interest in them through that. And I've found that it's much more fertile ground now trying to speak about it, because here it has appeared by nature. As I said, the 504 standing clumps represent 5,040. That's a 10th part of both those two figures. And the total sum of them is not 12960, but 1296. Nevertheless, it's pointing out those two numbers. And I'll show you what those two numbers mean. Plato refers to 5,040 in the laws as being the key number by which every institution in the state should be run. And he takes it as a symbol of that whole canon of number, which was actually, which he says was preserved by the ancient Egyptians in their temples, and they used them to keep their society the same and in perfect order and in tune with the heavenly emanations. And you see that spiral you've seen back here, that's my drawing of it. It's done, see here it's done in black and white, so that every square is either black or white. So it's a sort of somewhat jerky looking. And this is what it represents. And this is a pattern called mitochondrial DNA, which I knew nothing about at all before, but it apparently is our matriarchal inheritance. It's only passed on through women. Everyone has it, but it's passed on through women. It has been passed on the same way since the first primordial woman, since Eve, as it were. And it has its own life. It only differs from DNA because its ends are closed. It doesn't. They're not two. It's not a strand. It's a loop. The ends join up with each other to make an endless double spiral like that. And I believe it's like an organism in its own right. It has its own functions and so on. And it's so it exists within us as perhaps like an implant or something like that. But it's said to, as I say, only come down through the female line. Now, that's the place where this crop circle appeared. There it is in Alan's drawings above. And you see how its proportions are such that if you put a triangle, equilateral triangle, around the inner circle, it'll be enclosed in its turn inside the outer circle. And indeed, you can then do two triangles crossing each other, which is a union of two triangles coming up and coming down, creating the hexagon, which is one of the marriage numbers, for different reasons. But because you can see it's the triangle coming from below, meeting the triangle coming from above, and being held in perfect balance. And from that comes all the symbols, all the geometry of the number 6, and everything which relates to inorganic nature, to the structure of the universe itself. The 12 and the 6 are the structural numbers, As I said earlier, the 5 is the number of life and growing things, and the number 7 is the number of eternal and spiritual things, and of the eternal feminine in nature, the soul. So the point of symbolic geometry, which I practice, is to combine these various numbers together, and when you combine all possible types of every proportion in geometry, then you have that complete picture of the world, that complete cosmology, which we call, what St. John called the heavenly city. And I'll show you that later very shortly. And he described the heavenly city in the penultimate book in Revelation, in the penultimate chapter in Revelation. In the very last chapter, he referred to the same diagram as the tree of life. In the middle of the garden, where the 4 streams of paradise had their source, was this tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded its fruit every month. And the leaves of the tree are for the healing of nations. It relates to that number 12, you see, it was used in the past, that there are 12 just types of human psychology, 12 types of people, and 12 races of mankind. So I said, what are these 12 races? Well, 3 from the north, 3 from the south, 3 from the east, and 3 from the west. You have to sort out the rest yourself. But by that tree of life, he made another symbol of that. It's a dodecagon. It's a dodecahedron, which is unique because it's a 12-sided solid figure, which indeed the philosophers say represents the whole universe, represents the media in which everything else is contained. Everything is contained within a circle. Of course, the sphere is the most perfect of all shapes because it's perfectly equidistant from the center at every point. But the dodecahedron represents really the 12 types of humanity held together in a harmonious world. So it's a symbol of the paradise on earth, with harmonious living between all different types of things and people. And that's represented by the heavenly city. But to come back to what we see here, that's a proportion of the geometry of this figure, and that's where it stood. You see at the bottom there is the stylized, is a little circle which represents a figure. On the left is a little hamlet and farmstead of Cricket Soley, and on the right is Straight Soley. I never heard of these places before, though I know this country pretty well. They were once probably a bit bigger, now they're just farmsteads, and there's a little path, you see a little dotted line, that's a path, public footpath between them. And it's right on the border of Wiltshire and Berkshire. It's borderline territory, and everything about it is borderline. You've got Crooked and Soley. In our little book, Alan Brown made a lovely chapter of how you've got Upper Farm and Lower Farm and East Farm and West Farm, all the different opposites in that district. It's delightful, actually. And there's actually a bigger geometry of this, where the geometry of the circle is repeated inside this circle, ending up with the diameter of the whole thing of not 504, but 5040, 5040, that key number. I'll show you what that means now. Oh, going the wrong way. Oh, actually, I made rather a mess of it. I tried to draw it to show the divisions. And you see, you put your compass, you divide that inner circle, or rather that inner standing corn circle, standing wheat circle, into 72 divisions. It's complicated to draw. And then you draw on each of those, from each of those 72 points, you draw a complete circle, which goes outside the bounds of the existing, of the actual circle, into that brown area around, and then it goes in again and makes that like a little moon at the center. And from that you can count the 7 to 11, which of course is a pi fraction, 22 to 7. Or 11 to 7. It's actually the 11 to 7 is the ratio between the area of a square and of a circle held within it. And anyway, I've gone into the pi pattern now. Of course, I'm afraid I've got it slightly sideways. No matter. Let's go on. Now there you see, can you see that? At the top left-hand corner, there are the numbers 1 to 10 written out. And you see the numbers 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 of 5040, our number 5040. And also the numbers 7 times 8 times 9 times 10 equal 5042. 5040 as well. So the decades, the numbers 1 to 10, are divided by the 7, that mysterious and pivotal 7, into two parts, each of them multiplying to 5040. The 5040 is the first number which can be divided by at least half that number, and the first number that can be divided by all the numbers from 1 to 7. And then you see each of those, without the 7, the numbers 1 to 6 multiplied together equals 720, and the numbers 8 times 9 times 10 equals 720. But with the 7 included, they both represent 5040. And then below are the numbers 8 times 9 times 10 times 11, which multiply together to 7920, is it? 7,920. So you've got your 5040 and your 7920 just made out of the first 11 numbers. And there below you see if the radius of your circle, this is the cosmological circle, is 5040, or the numbers 1 to 7 multiplied together, which mathematicians call factorial 7, that's 1 to 7 multiplied together, then the circumference will be, or the quadrant of the circumference, the quarter of the circumference, will be the numbers 8 times 9 times 10 times 11 multiplied together. Anyone with a pocket calculator, using the cosmological pi, which is 22/7, can verify that for themselves. And then you see that, here's a development from it, that when you put that circle, you take that circle, the one on the left, and the total circumference is 31680. I'll go into this a little bit later. By the way, have we got any more time, or am I running short of time?
We've got about 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay, within that, I think. It's very, very difficult. Don't be dismayed if you don't take these numbers in of this kind of teaching, because I can't. I'm not a good teacher. I never really managed to convey much about it. And I feel that sometimes people are bored. But I see this audience, you here are rather different because we're all on the same tack. And this is the most extraordinary thing that this crop circuit was pointing out. The key numbers in this canon of number, which begins with the codification of the first 12 numbers. In fact, here we get the numbers 1 to 11, but the further development is needed, and then it's the first 12 numbers codified together. This is the simplest way in which you can do a simple circle or simplest geometrical figures and incorporate the numbers 1 to 11. Numbers 1 to 7 as a radius, and the numbers 8 times 9 times 10 times 11 as a quadrant of the circumference. And 4 times 7920 is 31680. That number was known to us, I'm not sure it was known to me, but I came across this many years ago. And at the same time I got very interested in something which hadn't really been explored. There's about one book about it by a man called Sterling in Victorian times. He wrote a book called The Canon. He must have been a Freemason, and he had some inkling of very interesting traditions of symbolic number. And I learnt the principle from him. Then I discovered this number 31680, which is a number which, when this ancient sacred science was adopted by the Gnostics, the early Christians, they adapted the name of the first principle of Christianity, Lord Jesus Christ, to produce the number 3168 by adding the numbers of the letters of which it's comprised. In the Greek, it's Kyrios, meaning Lord, Jesus, Jesus Christos, Lord Jesus Christ. Kyrios means Lord in the sense in every sense. It also means Lord of the Zodiac. So it's a name given to the dominant of the age you're in. So they saw that the Christianity as being the dominant for the age of Pisces, in which it appeared. And of course Jesus was compared to the fish, and the numbers of his name was probably Joshua, or Joshua, the Jewish name, of course. There's no name Jesus. It was adapted by the Gnostics, or by the early Christian scholars, probably in Alexandria, to bring Christianity in line with the principles of pre-Christian or pagan theomancy, or the scientific discrimination of the different gods and powers in the universe. And as I said, the name Jesus was adapted to give a number 888. Because you see, how it works is this. Alpha, the first letter, is 1, beta is 2, gamma is 3. Then you get on to iota, which is I, which is 10. The next one's 20, 30, 40, up to 90. And then a rho, or the R, is 100, and it goes 100, 200, up to omega, which is 800. So every letter has its number. And of course, it really relates to sound in the end, that every letter has its vibration, every sound has its vibration. They're given numbers, which makes them into a harmony, and you can construct harmonies out of number. And so names and tones and geometrical proportions were subordinate to the same code of number. And certainly these same numbers, I've studied this thing exhaustively, and it's a basis of the sort of classical music which Justin Godwin and Ernest MacLean study and write about and are experts in. So it's this one key of number which runs through all the phenomena of nature and science. And indeed, as Pythagoras said, all is number, everything depends on the same code of number. If the physicists would use the right units, they'd find out that the same code of number run through all the phenomena, from the astronomical to the microscopic scale throughout the universe. This is revelation indeed. I could explain the second figure on the right. You see, the figure on the left has a circumference of 4 times 7920, which is 31680, the name of Jesus. And if you do a square with the same perimeter, then of course each of its 4 sides will be 7920, 7920, making 3168. So the measure around the circle is the same as the measure around the square. And the circle contained within that square has of course a radius of 7,920. Well, there's 7,920 miles in the circumference of the Earth, in the diameter of the Earth. That's the mean diameter, not the equator. The mean diameter of the Earth is 7,920 miles. Well, I first got that when St. John describes the heavenly Jerusalem. He says it measures on either side. It's a square measuring 12,000 furlongs. Well, a furlong is 660 feet, as you'll know. So 12 furlongs is 7920 feet. So he's describing the sacred earth. And then he says that the perimeter is 144 cubits. Now the Egyptian cubit, as I've learnt later from the study of number and study of metrology, is the Egyptian cubit by which the pyramid is used. There are 2 cubits relating to each other by the fraction of 175 to 176. But the greater of these cubits, its value is 1.728 feet. And 1728 is 12 by 12 by 12. As I say, it's framed a whole system of measure and number throughout the world, all the traditional measures throughout the world, apart from the meter, which is the cuckoo in the nest and means nothing. Every other one, it really does mean nothing, and I'd like to congratulate you on standing it off. I think I told you we had a great rally here about 20 years ago, or rather in New York, which turned out to be, we call it the football. And it was a great event, and it raised a lot of publicity for the reason why we must reject the metric system, because it has no meaning. It's typical of the institutions of the modern world, which are meaningless and got away from all values, human or natural. It's an impractical measure. For example, it's got no foot unit. It's much too large for any practical use. And every other measure all over the world is all based on a foot. Now these feet are not the same length, but they all relate to each other by proportions. That is 24 to 25, or 49 to 50, or some proportion, one term of which is always a square. And indeed, as I discovered some years ago, quite recently, the entire canon of units of measure throughout the whole world, including those used in the New World to construct the Mexican and the Mexican pyramids and the monuments of Central America, they're using exactly the same measure as was used by the pyramids in ancient Egypt and is visible in Stonehenge. And it's by comparison of St. John's account of the dimensions of the heavenly Jerusalem and the dimensions of Stonehenge, and then realizing that there's a code of number behind all these measures. And I was able to discover the actual values of these ancient units of measure. And I've seen them again in crop circles. That's chapter 2 of the story, actually. But what was revealed to St. John is being revealed now is these two numbers from which one can discover the whole basis of ancient science, traditional science, which is itself a revelation of the actual nature and composition of the universe. It implies, of course, a creator. Now here it's interpretation. You see, as I told you, the Earth is 7,920 miles across. You see, radius 3960, that's half 7920. The moon's diameter, I placed the moon tangent to the Earth, as you see. The moon's diameter is 2160, that's 6 times 6 times 60 miles, because a foot and the mile are, this is not chauvinism, the foot and the mile are actually the basic measures and the whole ancient system of number and measure. Unless you use the foot as your base measure, you'll get nowhere. You'll have no firm ground to define any one unit of measure. And that modern metrologists who use the meter have got nowhere, and they're still getting nowhere because they never have any firm measure which they know the exact value of. It's only when you use the foot and you see how it's all done in pure number that you can then work out the whole world's ancient metrology, and thereby have the key to measuring and interpreting all the sacred buildings of the ancient world. Because those numbers they put in their temples were not arbitrary. They were they all related to the gods to whom that, or the natural principles to whom that temple was dedicated. And in fact, at Cricket Soli, as I told you, the number of divisions there is 1296, or 6 by 6 by 6 by 6. And 1296 is the number of a very important phrase among the gods expressed in the ancient Greek. Thea Pantone, the goddess of all, or the great goddess. That's whom that circle is dedicated to. It's proclaimed in the number of its divisions. Here again, you see, on the right, you see the moon. Its radius is 1080 miles. 1080 miles is also the number of Tohagion Pneuma, the Holy Spirit, of its atomic weight of silver, 108, is the angle of the pentagon, the female. It runs throughout the whole of nature and gematria as the number of the yin, or the lunar, or the visionary, or the female principle in nature. And the combination, the number that goes with it, because all number has to be combined with our opposite. You see, in Revelation, everything is combined with its opposite. If you remember the symbolism in Revelation, there's the whore of Babylon, and there's the Lamb of God. Well, the Tohanion and Tophtherion are the opposite sides of the same coin. Babylon and Jerusalem are the same city. It's the bride and the whore which are contrasted, the beast and the lamb. The beast number is, 666. That's a number of pure solar energy. It's a sum of the numbers from 1 to 36. It's not an evil number. It's attracted much superstition, because any number is evil if it's unbalanced, and 666 represents pure power, imperial power, the will, the passions, the element of power and dominion in nature. And the opposite of it is the lunar number 1080. Together they produce 1746, which means Father, Son, Spirit in Gematria. I've got many terms together which relate to the whole, and that appears later on in this diagram. But to continue here, you see, if the moon is placed in tangent to the Earth, then a circle struck from the center of the Earth and running through the center of the moon has a radius of 3960 plus 1080, which is our number 5040, or factorial 7, and its circumference is 3180, the number of Lord Jesus Christ. And at the same time, the Earth, with its diameter 7920, the square containing it has the same perimeter. It's 4 times 7920, or 31680 miles. So the Earth and the Moon together produce the squaring of the circle and square of equal perimeters. And that symbolism of that is that the circle is eternity and divinity, whereas the square is more material, it's rational. The circle is irrational and eternal. The square is a symbol of more of man-made and physical things. So those two, that figure was always placed together at the foundation of all universal temples. Stonehenge, the radius to the center is 50, not 504, but 50.40 feet. And its circumference, of course, is 3168. The circumference of the lintel circle, which is 31680, is in feet, is 6 miles. It's 6 times 5280, the number of feet in a mile. So this is the basic figure of cosmological geometry. It's called the cosmological diagram. John called it the holy city. You can call it other things, but
5 minutes.
Right. That shows you the fact of the matter. You see, the ratio of the Earth to the Moon are 11 to 3. 7920 to 2160, which is 72 times 3 and 72 times 11. 72, of course, being the number which we saw in Crooked Soles, the number of arcs in the one of the main numbers in that figure. And there again, these are 3 examples of the cosmological circle in Gematria. You see, in the first one, the 12 gods, who are the traditional rulers of the earth, you take that as a diameter, the number of the 12 gods is 1008, which is twice 504, so the radius is 504. And the circumference would then be Nous Ton Dodecatheon, temple of the 12 gods. Naos also means a ship, we get navigation, and the nave in a church, because the church is only a boat turned upside down, because the same structure is used for the roof as is used by old-fashioned shipbuilders in building timbered ships. So it's like the ship in which the souls would sail. You see, the numbers so coincide that if you have a diameter of, if you have a radius of 5040 or diameter of 10080, then the circumference 3168 gives you that phrase, or it'll give you the middle one, Dodecahagioi, the 12 saints, and the circumference, the sanctuary of the apostles. That's a Christian one, 3168. Or if you look at the right, the pagan one, where the left-hand radius, or the right-hand radius, left-hand radius is To Hagion, holy, holiness, 504, and the right-hand one is another great archetypal principle, To Agathon, the good, goodness, 504, and the circumference there is 3168, or Lord Jesus Christ. That was how it was. So this is how Christianity inherited from the pagan religion this science of sacred names. But the church fathers later put it down. They didn't want to have anything to do with the pagan science. They wanted it to be a pure break with what had gone before. I think we've probably suffered from this break. We've been cut off from our roots by it, you see. And for 2,000 years we've lost it. It's now being restored. I'm just coming to the end now. And there is, again, a development of that picture of the Earth and the Moon. You see those white circles represent the 12 moons in the year. Or they also represent 2160, which is the diameter of the Moon. 2160 is also the number of years in the great year, in which the Sun moves through one sign of the zodiac. So the great year lasts 12 times 2160, which is 25920, 25,920 years. That's the cycle of the where the Sun goes through the whole zodiac, and that the circle they're touching is, of course, the circle of the Earth, 7920, and then that'll include the 7 in the form, because each center and each gap between those 12 circles, which actually occur where the circle and the square meet, they each fit there to make a 28 division, which fits into that matrix of the 12 moons set around the Earth. And the 28 is, of course, the 28 days in the lunar month as such, or the natural month. And it's combining the 7 and the 12, and then the geometry develops from that. There's another version of that. That's another version of it. I said, quoting from St. John, the 12 fruits of the tree of life, each a different colour, going round in the spectrum, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of nations. And I imagine those 28 spokes are the leaves of the tree. And they have that natural break where they meet each other, and then the equilateral triangles in green then cut in and they make the 28 divisions inside it. And that's Alan Brown's, he happened to sit again inside it, that's Alan Brown did it on his computer and got this very clear and beautiful figure. What a coincidence. I've just finished. Oh. Thank you. So that's it. Thank you very much indeed.